The world remembers June 6, 1944, D-Day, as the day that changed the course of the Second World War. But far fewer know that just 10 weeks later, the Allies launched another massive invasion of France, one nearly equal in scale and ambition, yet destined to fade into the footnotes of history. It was called Operation Dragoon, and for reasons that still stir debate among historians and military analysts, it became the forgotten offensive, overshadowed by the thunder of Normandy. In the suffocating summer heat of July 1944, Allied commanders gathered behind closed doors in London and Washington, arguing fiercely over the future path of the war. Winston Churchill opposed the plan from the beginning, believing an invasion of southern France would drain resources needed in the Balkans. General Dwight D. Eisenhower, however, insisted that striking the German hold on the French Mediterranean coast was essential to secure ports that could supply the rapidly advancing armies in the north. "We cannot sustain our forces in Normandy without the harbor of Marseille," he warned. His words held the weight not just of strategy, but of desperation. The Allies were winning battles, but straining to keep men fed, armed and reinforced. Thus, on August 15, 1944, at 8 a.m., the silence over the French Riviera shattered beneath the thunder of naval guns. Battleships and cruisers from the U.S. 8th Fleet, including the USS Texas and USS Nevada, opened fire on the fortified beaches near Cavalaire-sur-Mer, Saint-Tropez, and Saint-Raphael. From offshore, the sea appeared calm and blue, almost peaceful, but the coastline erupted into plumes of sand, rock, and fire. The German defenders, elements of the weakened yet disciplined 19th Army, scrambled into bunkers and trenches along the waterline, bracing for an attack they had long expected yet now faced with dwindling resources and morale. Through the smoke-streaked sky, landing craft ferried thousands of soldiers toward shore. These men belonged to the U.S. 7th Army, commanded by General Alexander Patch, hardened by brutal fighting in Italy and North Africa. Among them marched the 3rd Infantry Division, once led by the legendary Major General Lucian Truscott, a unit whose blue and white patch was stained with the memory of Anzio and Salerno. Their mission was clear: break through the coastal defenses and push rapidly inland to secure a corridor for advancing armor. The tension was palpable inside every landing craft. Veterans recalled the hum of engines, the salt sting of spray, and the metallic stench of fear. Private First Class Henry Martin of the 36th Infantry Division later wrote in his diary, "We'd been told Normandy was hell. We wondered what kind of hell waited for us here." When the ramps dropped, the world exploded into gunfire. German machine gun nests, buried deep within concrete bunkers, unleashed torrents of fire onto the incoming waves of troops. Yet against expectation, German defenses faltered sooner than predicted. Their artillery response was fragmented, their infantry units scattered. Intelligence officers monitoring intercepted signals noted confusion among German field commanders. Something had changed within their leadership, but what, no one could clearly say. As daylight rose higher, another piece of the operation unfolded far beyond the beaches. Over 400 transport aircraft droned across the Mediterranean sky, carrying paratroopers from the 517th Parachute Regimental Combat Team, the British 2nd Independent Parachute Brigade, and glider infantry transports. Their objective: seize key road junctions around WWII to block German reinforcements from moving toward the beaches. It was one of the largest airborne assaults of the war outside of Normandy. But the night turned treacherous. Thick coastal fog and heavy German flak tore through the formations, scattering aircraft across hundreds of miles. Paratroopers jumped blind into darkness, some landing miles off target, others into forests, vineyards, or marshland. Several transport planes vanished entirely, their fates never fully documented. Official after-action reports would later state blandly that elements of the airborne drop were unaccounted for, but rumors spread that entire sticks of paratroopers simply disappeared. Despite the chaos, scattered companies regrouped with remarkable determination, capturing bridges, crossroads, and German command posts. By sunset on August 15th, the beachheads were secure, more than 60,000 Allied troops were ashore, and the German 19th Army was retreating. The operation had succeeded beyond expectation, yet its success raised troubling questions. Why had German forces collapsed so quickly? Why had Berlin issued sudden retreat orders instead of demanding prolonged resistance, as Hitler had done everywhere else? And what became of the missing airborne teams never recovered from the operation's first hours? As the smoke cleared over the French Riviera, few realized that this invasion would accelerate the liberation of France and reshape the final year of the war. Yet even fewer understood the mysteries that now lingered beneath its triumph. The story of Operation Dragoon, its unexpected success, its unexplained gaps, and its forgotten cost, was only beginning to unfold. And as Allied troops pushed inland, they would soon discover clues that pointed toward a deeper and darker story behind the German retreat. Before dawn on August 15, 1944, the skies over the Mediterranean pulsed with the roar of thousands of engines. From North Africa, Corsica, and Italian airfields, waves of C-47 Dakotas, Waco gliders, and British Albemarles lifted into the darkness, carrying one of the largest airborne forces yet committed to the war outside of Normandy. Their mission was precise and critical: cut off German reinforcement corridors leading from the interior of southern France to the coastal defenses now under assault by Allied infantry landing on the Riviera beaches. The airborne spearhead would strike at the heart of German movement, locking their 19th Army into confusion and collapse. Among these units was the 517th Parachute Regimental Combat Team, under the command of Colonel Rupert Graves, already hardened by brutal fighting in Italy. They were joined by the 509th Parachute Infantry Battalion, the 550th Glider Infantry Battalion, and the British 2nd Independent Parachute Brigade under Brigadier James Hill. Packed tightly into transport planes, the men sat on canvas benches, hands gripping parachute straps, boots vibrating against the deck with every adjustment of the pilot's throttle. The air was thick with anticipation and sweat. Chroniclers describe that the moonlit sea below looked almost serene, an illusion broken only by the glow of tracers rising from German anti-aircraft batteries hidden deep in the hills. Then came the fog, a dense rolling blanket of vapor that swallowed aircraft formations and disrupted radio navigation. Suddenly, the sky dissolved into chaos. Planes lost visual contact. Headings faltered. A formation meant to stretch in perfect symmetry scattered like leaves in a storm. The only certainty, one British pilot later wrote, was that none of us knew exactly where we were. At 4:30 a.m., jump lights flashed green, and men hurled themselves into the darkness. The airborne landing zone around WWII, a crucial road junction east of Dragoon, was supposed to be marked by recognition panels and signal lights. Instead, the ground was invisible beneath fog and smoke, lit only by scattered fires and muzzle flashes. Paratroopers hit vineyards, stone walls, orchards, and rugged hillsides. Some crashed into the branches of cork oak trees and hung helpless until cut free. Others landed near German patrols and were forced to fight immediately upon touching ground. Across the area, small pockets of parachute infantry coalesced. A group from the 517th secured the hamlet of La Motte, exchanging fierce gunfire with German defenders. A British platoon captured the bridge across the Nartaby River, holding it against repeated counterattacks. Meanwhile, elements of the 509th mistakenly dropped near Collis, nearly 15 kilometers off target. Cut off and surrounded, they fought their way back without knowing whether the invasion was succeeding or failing. Years later, surviving veterans would call Dragoon the most disorienting jump of the war, more scattered even than Sicily. But some units never regrouped at all. Transport aircraft numbered 42 reported missing or severely damaged after their run. Several were last seen trailing smoke over forested highlands near Les Arcs. After-action reports list 3 sticks of paratroopers whose identities and landing sites remain uncertain to this day. Their names appear in official paperwork, yet no bodies, equipment, or crash sites were found during the initial sweep or in post-war investigations. In the rushed days of the advance, these absences were filed away as unrecovered casualties, overshadowed by the speed of the offensive. But quietly, officers questioned how entire planeloads could vanish without trace. While the airborne troops battled confusion on the ground, the assault from the sea continued to push inland. The beachheads at Cavalaire, Saint-Tropez, and Saint-Raphael swelled with armor and artillery as General Alexander Patch's forces fought through German strongpoints. But what surprised Allied intelligence was not the ferocity of German resistance, it was the inconsistency of it. Some positions fought to the last man, while others withdrew abruptly, abandoning ammunition stores and heavy equipment. The contradiction raised a troubling question. Were the Germans acting under panic, or under orders? Intercepted radio transmissions hinted at a directive from Berlin late on August 14, a command ordering the 19th Army to disengage and retreat northward at speed. The order contradicted every prior instruction Hitler had issued in occupied Europe. Coastal fortifications from Norway to Normandy had been instructed to hold at all costs. Yet here, retreat was demanded without explanation. General Johannes Blaskowitz, commanding the German defense, was reportedly furious but complied, sending columns scrambling inland along narrow mountain roads. The reason behind Berlin's sudden shift remains debated. Some historians argue Hitler feared encirclement after losses in Normandy. Others suggest the German command sought to protect critical industrial or intelligence assets located deeper within France. A few officers even speculated about the movement of classified materials or personnel out of southern coastal zones. Meanwhile, as dawn burned away the night fog, scattered airborne groups finally began linking together, achieving their objectives despite the disarray. By noon, the key junctions around WWII were secured, sealing the fate of German hopes for reinforcement. The road to the Riviera beaches lay open, and the Allied landings could now expand without fear of counterattack from the interior. Operation Dragoon's airborne strike, costly, chaotic, and mysterious, had succeeded beyond expectation. But in the smoke and confusion of those early hours, unanswered questions lingered. Why had German resistance collapsed so quickly? Where were the missing paratroopers? And what secret compelled Berlin to abandon southern France almost without a fight? As armored columns began moving northward, the Allies would soon encounter evidence that the retreat was more than strategic, and that darker motives lay hidden along the roads ahead. The hunt for answers would begin as troops pushed deeper into the French interior, following the mysterious disappearance of German convoys and the strange silence left in their wake. In the days that followed the landings of August 15, 1944, Allied commanders expected a prolonged and savage struggle through the rugged interior of southern France. The terrain alone, thick forests, jagged hills, narrow passes, and ancient stone villages, seemed built for defense. Yet, instead of entrenched German resistance, advancing forces encountered something unsettling. Fortified positions abandoned, supply depots left intact, artillery pieces sitting silent with breech blocks still warm. It was as if the defenders had vanished overnight. Facing the Allied push was Army Group G, commanded by General Johannes Blaskowitz, a seasoned officer respected even by his enemies for his discipline and tactical intelligence. Blaskowitz's forces, already weakened by transfers to the Normandy front and the attrition of years of occupation duties, were stretched thin across southern France. But they were not yet broken. Field reports estimated nearly 250,000 German troops in the region on the eve of the invasion, including the 11th Panzer Division, among the most capable armored formations left in the West. A determined stand in the mountainous interior could have delayed the Allies for months. And yet, that stand never came. Beginning late on August 14, before the first Allied troops hit the beaches, intercepted wireless transmissions monitored by ultra-intelligence teams aboard British signal ships suggested a stunning development. A coded command from Berlin ordering an immediate withdrawal of the 19th Army northward toward Dijon. The directive contradicted Hitler's well-established doctrine. Every coastal position was to be held to the last man, as demanded at Normandy, Dieppe, and Monte Cassino. Even rumors of surrender could mean execution for commanders. But this order was unmistakably genuine, and strangely urgent. To the Allies, it felt like a trap. General Alexander Patch cautioned his corps leaders that the retreat could be a feint intended to lure advancing forces into ambush. But as U.S. armored spearheads rolled past abandoned barricades and hastily deserted camps, the evidence indicated something else. A retreat conducted with chaotic haste. Tracked vehicles blocked mountain paths, not out of strategy but because they had run out of fuel. Field kitchens were left still burning. Medical tents stood stocked with morphine and bandages. It looked less like organized withdrawal and more like flight. Diary entries from soldiers give voice to the bewilderment. Private James Tillman of the 36th Infantry Division wrote on August 18, "We expected hell in these hills. Instead, we found tables set with unfinished meals. They left in such a hurry we could still feel the heat of the stoves." Another infantryman described a German half-track abandoned beside a road with its driver slumped dead, not from battle, but from exhaustion, head resting on the wheel. Yet hidden among the confusion were darker discoveries. Reconnaissance patrols from the 3rd Infantry Division reported sightings of long German motor columns retreating north through the Massif des Moors, winding along remote forest tracks instead of main highways. One report, filed by Lieutenant Robert Hayes, noted that reconnaissance aircraft observed an entire armored convoy moving without lights through a forest road network not shown on available maps. Hayes later wrote that the column appeared to be transporting large, covered cargo loaded onto flatbed trucks escorted by armored cars, cargo that could not be identified. When Allied scouts reached the region days later, they found the road buried in thick woods littered with burned-out hulks. Yet there were no bodies, no identification papers, and no trace of the cargo, only charred metal shells as if they had been torched deliberately. The ground showed signs of controlled demolition charges placed under the engines. They destroyed something they didn't want found, one intelligence officer concluded. But what that was, nobody could say. Speculation spread rapidly through Allied headquarters. Some suggested the Germans were relocating scientific or industrial materials critical to weapons development. Others, citing captured officers, whispered about the removal of gold reserves and looted art stored inland after being moved from coastal vaults earlier in the war. A more cryptic theory suggested the evacuation of senior officials or intelligence teams involved in sensitive research. Most of these theories were never publicly confirmed. Even stranger were the testimonies of civilians from villages near La Garde-Freinet and Plan-de-la-Tour. Several claimed to have seen columns of German vehicles traveling under heavy guard, avoiding main roads and refusing to stop even when mechanical trouble left vehicles struggling up steep gradients. One elderly farmer recalled, "They didn't look like soldiers retreating. They looked like men escorting something more valuable than themselves." For Allied historians, the contradiction between the rapid collapse of defenses and the apparent precision of selective withdrawal remains one of the enduring puzzles of Operation Dragoon. Why did Berlin issue an order so radically opposed to Hitler's principles? Why were certain units and assets moved with such secrecy while others were abandoned to their fate? And what was being transported through those mountain routes before the convoys disappeared and destroyed themselves? Researchers searching post-war archives found gaps in records, missing communications logs, and deliberate omissions in reports filed by both German and Allied intelligence personnel. Files that might have explained the retreat were classified for decades. Some still remain restricted. As U.S. troops advanced northward, they would soon uncover further signs that the German retreat was not just a collapse of morale, but a controlled extraction of something, or someone, hidden within the chaos. And as Allied armor rolled deeper into the interior of France, they would face a retreating enemy who refused to fight, but also refused to reveal what they were protecting. As the Allied advance pushed north from the beaches, the momentum of Operation Dragoon seemed unstoppable. Columns of Sherman tanks, half-tracks, and supply trucks surged through narrow roads that wound like veins through the rugged interior of southern France. Villages that had remained under German occupation for 4 long years erupted into celebration, their streets flooded with white flags and tricolor banners pulled from hidden attics. Yet behind the scenes of liberation and triumph, a more disturbing picture began to emerge. One marked by clues suggesting that the German retreat was not merely chaotic but deliberately obscured. The advance of 6 Corps, led by Major General Lucien Truscott, moved rapidly through the Massif des Moors, a mountain range running parallel to the coast. These steep slopes, dense forests, and twisting roads provided natural defensive terrain ideal for ambushes and delaying actions. Yet the expected resistance never materialized. Instead, reconnaissance units reported repeating scenes that baffled commanders. German armored vehicles abandoned in perfect working condition, supply caches left untouched, and mines planted not to kill but to slow pursuit. Outside the village of Colombières, patrols from the 3rd Infantry Division discovered a cluster of burned-out Panzer IV tanks nestled beneath the tree canopy. The vehicles were positioned in a defensive arc, yet there were no signs of battle, no shell casings, no bloodstains, no graves. The tanks appeared to have been destroyed by their own crews using internal demolition charges, precisely placed to obliterate engines and transmission assemblies while leaving hulls intact. Intelligence officers studying the wreckage noted that the tanks' radios had been removed before destruction. Someone wanted nothing left to salvage. The deeper the Allies pushed, the stranger the discoveries became. On August 20th, an armored reconnaissance platoon from the 45th Infantry Division followed a faint trail off a forest road near La Garde-Freinet after spotting smoke drifting through the trees. What they found was unnerving. A scorched clearing littered with the remains of dozens of trucks and armored cars, arranged in tight formation as if part of a convoy. The vehicles had been burned deliberately and systematically. Identical demolition charges placed beneath engine blocks, fuel tanks drained before ignition to reduce explosion risk. Metal fragments were collected into piles suggesting attempts to recover or conceal serial numbers. Yet the most chilling detail was the silence. No bodies, no equipment, no discarded personal belongings. Even dog tags had been removed. The clearing felt less like the aftermath of retreating panic and more like the burial of something meant never to be found. Lieutenant Edward Mallory, who led the patrol, later recorded in his field journal, "It felt like we arrived minutes too late. Whoever did this was thorough. It was as if a ghost army passed through and erased itself behind us." Nearby, civilians in the village of Grimo claimed to have heard the convoy during the night. Hundreds of engines, they said, grinding under heavy load as they climbed the steep passes. Several villagers reported seeing trucks covered with tarpaulins and guarded by armed escorts who threatened to shoot anyone approaching. One witness described hearing German voices shouting, "Schneller, schneller! Wir dürfen nichts zurücklassen. Faster, faster! We must leave nothing behind." Despite these testimonies, the official German war diary for Army Group G, captured days later, made no mention of a major convoy. Instead, pages covering the retreat route through the Massif des Moors were missing entirely, a gap that post-war historians still debate. As armored units advanced north toward Brignoles and Aix-en-Provence, the pattern repeated. Bridges had been destroyed with precision far beyond typical retreat procedures, not to block pursuit but seemingly to isolate specific withdrawal paths. Telephone lines had been cut in distinctive patterns resembling methods used to conceal radio movements. Allied signals intelligence noted sharply reduced German radio traffic, not due to collapse, but because radio silence had been imposed. The most mysterious discovery came on August 22nd, when infantry units pursuing the remnants of the 11th Panzer Division located a small cave complex hidden deep in the hills outside Plan de la Tour. Inside, they found charred documents, scattered fragments of crates marked with Reichsbank insignia, and scorched metal containers large enough to hold heavy industrial equipment, or something equally valuable. The cave ceiling bore marks from satchel charges used to bring it down, sealing a portion of the cavern permanently. Whatever had been stored or removed there, someone wanted erased from history. Speculation rippled through Allied headquarters. Some believed the retreat protected material related to Germany's increasingly desperate weapons research, early jet prototypes, atomic research papers, or advanced radar components. Others suspected the evacuation of looted gold, art, or state archives. A darker theory suggested the movement of personnel, intelligence officers, scientists, or political figures too valuable to risk capture. But without evidence, the truth remained hidden, buried beneath destroyed metal and missing reports. By late August, the Allied advance had linked with French resistance forces pushing north. German units continued to fall back toward the safety of Dijon, fighting only when cornered. But even as victory seemed assured, unanswered questions mounted. What had Berlin feared losing so badly that it sacrificed tens of thousands of soldiers to extract it? And why had the 11th Panzer Division, one of the most effective German units remaining, disappeared into the mountains only to reappear days later with half its strength unaccounted for? These mysteries would deepen as the Allies moved toward Lyon, where they would encounter the most unsettling evidence yet: evidence suggesting that southern France's retreat was not a collapse, but a coordinated vanishing act. The secret buried beneath the mountain fires was only the beginning. By early September 1944, Operation Dragoon had achieved what few Allied planners dared hope for. In less than a month, the US 7th Army and the French Army B had liberated almost the entirety of southern France, pushing German forces north in a sweeping advance that exceeded even the pace of the Normandy campaign. The strategic objectives, freeing the vital ports of Marseille and Toulon, were completed in record time. Yet behind the surface triumph lay a maze of questions that the rapid advance only deepened. The battle for Marseille and Toulon was fierce but shockingly brief. Both ports were among the most heavily defended coastal fortifications in Europe, expected to withstand siege for months. German doctrine insisted they were to be held, to the last cartridge. Instead, defenses collapsed within 2 weeks, opening the logistical arteries Eisenhower had desperately needed. Over 500 ships poured into Marseille by the end of September, delivering the supplies that powered the forthcoming Allied drive into Germany. However, as Allied engineers cleared rubble and reopened port facilities, French security forces and American intelligence teams uncovered sealed vaults and bunkers in the subterranean passages beneath the ports, vaults that had been emptied before Allied arrival. Witnesses reported German convoys leaving the city under heavy guard in the days preceding surrender, transporting boxes marked only with coded stenciling, Sondertransport, special transport. The crates' contents remain unknown. The mystery intensified as Allied and French troops moved north toward Lyon, chasing the retreating bulk of Army Group G. Colonel Frederick Butler of the U.S. 7th Army wrote in his September 5 situation report, "Enemy conduct is contradictory. Resistance is desperate in pockets, but major forces withdraw at unnatural speed. Strategic intent unclear." His confusion echoed throughout command channels. Berlin seemed willing to sacrifice cities, supplies, and garrisons, assets previously guarded with fanaticism, to protect something mobile, valuable, and hidden. On September 7th, advanced patrols of the French 1st Armored Division reached the outskirts of Montélimar, where elements of the 11th Panzer Division had regrouped. The battle that followed was one of the most desperate rearguard actions of the war, fought with brutal intensity along the Rhone Valley. The 11th Panzer, known as the Ghost Division for its speed and elusiveness, fought not to destroy the Allied force but to delay it, buying hours, not territory. Over 4 days, both sides clashed repeatedly across open farmland and narrow village streets. Yet, while the Germans fought with ferocity, their movements showed a pattern, a screen of armor shielding a northbound withdrawal corridor. American aerial reconnaissance captured photos showing long lines of vehicles, not armored formations, but flatbed trucks and civilian transport vehicles, shielded behind German tanks and anti-aircraft guns. When French forces finally broke through, they found wrecked panzers and abandoned machine gun nests. But again, no traces of the cargo that the 11th Panzer had protected. Locals reported seeing trucks loaded with large crates, guarded by officers who refused requests for surrender and threatened civilians who came too close. One captured German officer, interrogated by the U.S. Counterintelligence Corps, offered only a cryptic statement before clamming up, "You are too late. It is already gone. None of you must ever find it." His name and interrogation transcript vanished from later intelligence records. Meanwhile, on the Allied side, celebration mixed with frustration. The liberation of Lyon on September 3 was greeted with jubilation. Women wept in the streets. Members of the French forces of the interior dragged collaborators into public squares for judgment. But even in the emotional chaos of liberation, unusual reports circulated. Members of the French resistance claimed to have tracked an unidentified German convoy moving into the Jura Mountains east of the city, a remote region riddled with caves, abandoned mines, and dense forests perfect for concealment. These accounts were dismissed initially as confusion, the product of rumor and wartime adrenaline. But 2 days later, reconnaissance patrols from the 36th Infantry Division found a collapsed tunnel entrance in the foothills, its supports shattered by explosives. Scattered around the debris were fragments of crates and heavy lifting gear, along with the remains of burned documents. Among the debris lay a scorched metal container stamped with a Reichsbank emblem and a partially destroyed railway flat car. Whatever had been stored inside had been removed or destroyed, and the tunnel entrance demolished to bury evidence. The official after-action report concluded that the Germans had been evacuating strategically significant economic assets. But privately, Allied intelligence officers believed something more was at stake. Some pointed to records indicating Hitler had ordered the relocation of stolen European gold reserves earlier that year. Others whispered about research files from weapons programs. A few even speculated the evacuation involved personnel rather than material. Scientists, engineers, or intelligence operatives whose capture could alter the balance of the war. Yet nothing definitive could be proven. The rapid pace of the Allied advance left little time for careful investigation. The war's momentum demanded forward movement, not reflection, and unanswered questions were buried beneath reports of victory. By September 12, 1944, Operation Dragoon officially linked with forces advancing from Normandy, sealing the German retreat and marking a decisive moment in the liberation of France. The strategic impact was unquestionable. Vital ports reopened, supply lines secured, and the Western Front prepared for the final assault into the heart of the Third Reich. But the mysteries remained. What was the cargo guarded so fiercely by the 11th Panzer Division? Why were so many convoys destroyed without trace? And what forces dictated the sudden change in German strategy? As historians later observed, Operation Dragoon succeeded militarily. But strategically, there remained the sense that something slipped away into the smoke of retreat. And as the Allies celebrated, a final revelation awaited, a discovery that would raise more questions than it answered. The guns were finally quieting by mid-September 1944. The Southern Front had collapsed, the bulk of Army Group G was in full retreat toward the safety of the German border, and the once-occupied towns of Provence were now free. Allied commanders hailed Operation Dragoon as a decisive success, crediting its swift advance with shortening the war in France by months. Yet beneath the surface of triumph, a darker and more unsettling reality began to take shape, one that would haunt historians and military analysts for decades. For many soldiers on the ground, the end of Dragoon felt strangely incomplete. Victory had come too easily in certain sectors, the resistance too inconsistent, the retreat too calculated. Something about the German withdrawal did not align with the chaos expected from a collapsing army. As U.S. armored columns pushed closer to Dijon and the link-up point with forces from Normandy, strange rumors circulated through the ranks. Whispered stories of vanished convoys, destroyed tunnels, and missing paratroopers still unaccounted for since the first hours of the invasion. The final thread in the mystery emerged on September 14, when reconnaissance units from the French 1st Armored Division, operating alongside American engineers clearing debris along retreat routes, made a discovery east of Lyon that would ignite decades of speculation. Deep within a defile near the village of Sedan, search teams uncovered a series of interconnecting limestone caves, accessed through a narrow passage partially sealed with explosives. The entrance bore signs of recent demolition, jagged rock edges blackened by blast residue, support timbers splintered outward, and fresh scoring marks on surrounding stone. After hours of careful removal work, engineers gained access to the first chamber. Inside, they found remnants of heavy crates, shattered wooden pallets, and twisted metal bands used to secure transport loads. Paper ash covered the floors in drifts, suggesting intentional burning of documents. One fragment of partially charred parchment bore a label in German, Geheime Reichsake, do not copy, or Reichssekret, do not duplicate. What lay as the most disturbing discovery sat at the chamber's far end, a series of metal containers, some smashed and scorched beyond recognition, others sealed shut. A handful bore the Reichsbank eagle and serial numbers later confirmed to match inventory lists believed to contain part of the stolen wealth seized from occupied territories. But several containers were different, smaller, reinforced, and completely unmarked, built from a dense alloy unfamiliar to Allied engineers. They were empty. The men who discovered the site reported an uneasy silence. Lieutenant Charles Winfield of the U.S. Counterintelligence Corps later wrote, "It was clear something significant had been moved out. The space felt stripped, cleaned, and erased." He also noted deep parallel grooves carved into the limestone floor, marks consistent with heavy machinery or equipment being dragged toward an internal passageway that had been collapsed intentionally with explosives. Whatever had been there was removed, then buried. Attempts to pursue deeper into the cave system failed. Additional blasting risks were too great, and advancing forces had orders to continue pursuit of the retreating German columns, not spend weeks excavating rock. What remained of the cave site was hastily documented, photographed, and sealed, then classified. Portions of the report were later lost or redacted. Meanwhile, questions about the missing airborne units resurfaced. As final casualty lists were compiled, 3 full sticks from the 517th Parachute Regimental Combat Team remained unaccounted for. Men who had jumped during the scattered night drop near WWII but never rejoined their units, never appeared on hospital rosters, and whose remains were never recovered. Their disappearance was officially recorded as missing in action, but commanders quietly acknowledged the unexplained nature of their loss. Search teams later found one of the missing transport aircraft charred on a mountainside near Les Arcs. Its fuselage burned clean, no parachutes, weapons, or personal effects inside. There were no bodies. Rumors ran wild. Some claimed the paratroopers had encountered a German convoy and were killed to silence what they saw. Others speculated they were captured and transported with whatever secret cargo was being moved inland. The truth remains buried beneath speculation and conflicting reports. In the years after the war, Operation Dragoon faded into a secondary chapter of World War II history, overshadowed by the heroism and horror of Normandy. The deeper mysteries, the vanished convoys, the sealed caves, the missing men, were either ignored or quietly sealed in classified archives. Even decades later, researchers find gaps. Entire sections of German logistical records from August 1944 missing, Allied intelligence documents marked still restricted, eyewitness accounts contradicting official narratives. Historians continue to argue over what truly transpired in those chaotic weeks. Some maintain that Army Group G's retreat was a desperate attempt to regroup and escape encirclement. Others point to patterns: secrecy, destruction of records, precision demolitions, and strategic withdrawals shielding unknown assets, arguing that the retreat was actually a massive extraction under the cover of defeat. A small group of researchers believes Operation Dragoon may have brushed against one of the greatest hidden operations of the war, a transfer of resources, intelligence, or individuals whose importance justified sacrificing thousands of men and abandoning southern France entirely. The truth may never be fully known. And perhaps that is the lingering power of Operation Dragoon. The invasion that changed the course of the war, liberated millions, and yet left behind questions buried beneath forests, mountains, and sealed archives. Decades later, one unanswered question echoes louder than any artillery barrage. What was so important that the German command chose retreat over resistance, secrecy over survival, and silence over history? The files remain sealed. The cave entrance remains buried. The missing paratroopers remain unnamed. And Operation Dragoon remains the forgotten invasion, the one that turned the tide, and left behind a mystery still waiting in the shadows of war.